Now I want to bring on our special guest, a former Nebraska offensive lineman. All right, now a judge, Mr. MJ Flaum. How you doing, my friend?
Hey, Adam. How you doing, buddy?
Dude, life is good. Life is always a little bit better when we're having a bye week after a win, but it's okay. All right, we got something to look forward to, playing that USC game here in about a week. But, man, I'm very curious. We've had an eclectic mix of people join me on the year and a half I've been doing this show, but I do think it's the first time I've ever had a judge join me. So I'm curious, what's the process? All right, you're at Nebraska. Your career ends at Nebraska. What happens next, and what's the process that brought you into being a judge?
Yeah, it's an interesting story. So I took about a year off, looked at getting into coaching. I coached high school football back here in Colorado for a year, and then felt like I really wanted to do something more career-wise, more educational-wise. So I went to Creighton Law School and spent 3 years at Creighton getting a law degree. Loved it, fell in love with the city of Omaha, a wonderful experience. But I graduated in 2009, and the job market was not the best that it's ever been. So I ended up coming back home to Colorado and got a job as a district attorney in Adams County, Colorado. I did that for about 8 years, and then was contacted by a couple of individuals, and they gauged my interest in seeing if I would apply for the bench. I did so, and I was appointed as a county court judge here in Adams County, Colorado by Governor Hickenlooper, and I've been doing this for the last 8 years.
All right, so a couple of things. First of all, that's one of the few times it's okay to be a J-sker. It's perfectly acceptable to be a J-sker in that way, so congratulations on the law degree. Talk to me about being a DA, because I've often, I'll watch these lawyers, like my mom loved, I'm going to show my mom's age a bit, much love mom, but Perry Mason and Matlock back in the day. So I grew up watching all these lawyer shows with my mom, and I was like, man, would I be a DA? Would I be a defense attorney? There's pluses and challenges to both. So being a DA, what is that like? Because you're trying to convict people of crimes. Is there ever a doubt? What if I'm wrong? What if I convict the wrong person? Or what is that process like? And what's that job like?
Yeah, great question. I love that job. It got you in the courtroom. It got you in front of people. You're interacting with members of your community as jurors, as defendants, as victims. To me, I always loved the prosecution side of things because we had a lot of power in the sense that if you did come across a case that you were unsure about, if you did have some doubts about somebody's guilt or involvement with a crime, we had the authority to dismiss that case, to decide not to pursue that charge. So, I always appreciated that about the district attorney's office that I worked in and the job that we did. And so because of that discretion, no, I never felt like I was prosecuting somebody who didn't deserve it. I definitely had cases presented to me that I felt like the appropriate thing to do was to dismiss those charges.
So you didn't mention ever being a defense attorney, but I'm curious if you could put yourself in their shoes for a minute. You're obviously trying to get innocent people, off and to get them to be free if you're a defense attorney. But I have to imagine there's times when a defense attorney is defending someone they probably know is not innocent. How challenging do you think that would be if you were ever in that position?
Yeah, I would imagine it can be really difficult. I think that what's important in our criminal justice system for everybody involved to remember, whether you're a DA or a defense attorney or a judge, is that the ultimate goal is to achieve justice, right? And it's not winning or losing or anything in between. It's how do we achieve justice? And many of the defense attorneys that I've become very, very close friends with have explained to me that what drives them in that role and keeps them going in that role isn't necessarily to win or lose a case, but rather to ensure that the government is meeting their burden, doing their job, and making sure to hold the prosecution to their legal standard before we start to convict individuals or take away somebody's freedom. We need to make sure that the government is, meeting their burden of proof and doing things the way that they're supposed to be doing them. So I think that a lot of defense attorneys take the approach of it is their job to ensure that the government is acting in accordance with the Constitution.
All right, man. So being a judge, all right, you're a judge now, and let's say somebody is convicted of something, and it's upon you to, come up with a sentence, so to speak. What is that like? How? Because there's obviously, you can go shorter, you can go longer. I don't know all the legal terms, so maybe you can help out there if you'd like. But what is that like when you're trying to figure out, what type of consequence someone should have if they're found guilty of something?
Yeah, you're doing great. You got all the terms down.
Thank you.
It can be challenging at times. I think one of the biggest things that we have to weigh when imposing a sentence is we really have to balance the community safety interest with the victim's interest, if there is a victim in that case, and then also consider what's best for the defendant, not only now, but in the long run, right? So with a lot of the cases that I deal with as a judge, a lot of these individuals are going to be back in society in very short order. Some of them, most of them, immediately on probation. But even if we impose some type of a jail or community corrections or Department of Corrections sentence, usually these sentences are going to result in their release inside of a year or two. So a lot of times we have to take a look at what is going to best assist somebody in avoiding future contact with law enforcement. How do we keep them out of the system long term? And it can be a really fascinating and interesting conversation with all of the parties of the case on how you kind of balance those needs. But, I take a lot of pride and I want to make sure that I'm doing my best to try and identify sort of how an individual ended up in court in the first place, and through honest conversations and honest evaluations, try and figure out how we can best alter their life in a positive direction so that they're not, reoffending. I think if we never see that individual again, then everybody involved wins. So it's a great question. I'm not sure that I answered it, but you kind of have to weigh all three of those things when you're imposing a sentence.
No, I think that makes perfect sense. So throughout the course of a trial, obviously there are some things that the laws are pretty clear and defined on as to what's allowed in a court, what's not allowed. But some of those things are like a little bit discretionary. And, I think of maybe a line of questioning that a certain attorney may have with, whether it be the prosecutor or the defending lawyer, with a witness on the stand. And sometimes, the opposing lawyer will object and they don't want that question. Like, how do you determine this question is okay, this line of questioning is not? Because I got to imagine some of that's a little bit more subjective rather than cut and dried by the law.
Yeah, you hope that most of it is pretty cut and dry by the law. Occasionally it is a little subjective. Personally, I probably err on the side of, if it's the defense, I kind of err on the side of bringing in. If it's the prosecution, I think you really got to be careful on making sure that they're only introducing evidence that they really have a foundation and a legal basis to do so. I think you always want to give that deference to the defense. It's the defendant's liberty that's at stake. It's the prosecution's burden to prove that case. So if it is a close call, that's usually how I look at it, is I'll usually give the benefit of the doubt to the defendant. He typically has more at stake. He or she has more at stake.
All right, my man, last two questions for you. So you hand out a sentence. Obviously, you're trying to do the best you can, help that individual. You don't want to see them in court again, everything you've kind of mentioned. Do you ever have any sort of concern like, hey, this guy might, or this woman might try to get revenge on me later if they don't like the sentence? Has that ever been a concern of yours?
I'll be honest with you, it probably more as a district attorney.
Okay.
When I was initially hired out here, this is kind of a dark story, but one of the district attorneys that I replaced when I was initially hired in Adams County was murdered, and he was killed down in Denver. Wonderful guy, had a great family, and that murder always went unsolved. And it's always been unclear, was it some type of retaliation, or was it completely unrelated to his job as a district attorney? But that was really a feeling that hung over that office while I was there, and kind of this concern that's in the back of everybody's mind when you do this type of work, whether you're a DA or a defense attorney or a judicial officer. My hope at the end of the day is that regardless of what my decision is in a case, is that everybody involved feels like they were treated with dignity and respect. They feel like they were heard. And I hope that there's no long-term anger or ill will at the individuals involved, specifically me. But I also think it's something that at some point you just sort of have to remove from your mind and do your job.
All right, man, this may not be the most fluid transition in the world, but you did wear the N on your helmet, former Husker. So I got to ask you, do you think Nebraska gets the win at USC? And what do you think? Like, what's your final record prediction for them? Nobody has a freaking clue, but what do you think?
Oh, man. Before the season started, I was feeling pretty good. I thought 8 wins was very obtainable. At this point, I got to hope that we just hit that 6-win mark. I think we'll get it done. I'm not sure which one of these next 3 games we're going to win. I could also see us, picking off one or quite frankly, even all 3 of them, depending on what type of team shows up. But I think Rule is the right guy for the job. I love what I'm hearing from him, and I think we just got to start seeing some results on the field.
Well, I appreciate your time. I think a lot of Husker fans agree with you as far as just getting one more freaking win. So I appreciate your time. Thanks for joining me.
You got it, Adam. Anytime, buddy. Good to catch up.